Hello everyone, it is the Banter Guy here, and welcome to a bit of a talky video. This video is, as the title might suggest, on Dark Souls 2, which might explain why I've not been uploading much recently aside from this. It's because I've been powering my way through Dark Souls 2, and as you may have known from my Dark Souls walkthrough, I love Dark Souls. I never played Demon Souls. I started with Dark Souls on the Xbox 360, and I've moved to Dark Souls 2 now on the PC. Which, by the way, the PC port is lovely. It runs at a very smooth 60 frames per second, aside from two places, Majula and the Hyde's Tower of Flame. I don't know why, but I get really weird lag spikes in those two places. Well, I mean, it never drops below about 25, 30-ish frames per second, which, as a console gamer, I'm sort of used to, but it's very weird. Anyway, no, the PC port is fine, but my problems with Dark Souls 2 stem from the differences between plot and lure. Because Dark Souls 1 had a very simplistic plot, but very complex lure. And I think it's because the game director, whose name I cannot pronounce to save my life, um, anyway, the game director of Dark Souls 1, who everyone knows quite well except for me for some reason, he had a very clear, defined line between a plot and lure. Plot was the stuff that you needed to give you an incentive to progress through the game, and lure was a bit of backstory about the world. Plot is what's happening now, lure is what's going on behind you, in the background, not in focus, really. And Dark Souls 2 has blurred that line so much that I have got no incentive to go through the game. And by the way, the plot of Dark Souls 2 is paper thin. It's almost non-existent. For the first, 4 hours of the game, I hadn't a clue what to do, where to go. You start off in a... by the way, no spoilers for this. I really, really don't want to put spoilers into the video, but I'll just say this. You are looking for 4 big souls to get through the first half of the game. So, ring any bells from Dark Souls 1? And I know they just don't want to step too much on the legacy of Dark Souls, but looking for 4 big souls, I mean, repetition much. But I just feel like Dark Souls 1 was a great game, simplistic plot so as to make you want to go through it and get to the end, but really complex lore so the veterans, and people like VatiVidya, they could go through that, all the item descriptions and character dialogue if they wanted to find out more about the world they were in. And that's all fine. But Dark Souls 2 is... the other thing about Dark Souls 2 is, as far as I know, Demon Souls was linear. Like, not like in story, but in terms of design. So like you have a hub world and you have various levels from that world. It's a linear, and each level was quite a linear pathway. Dark Souls 2, or Dark Souls rather, was the complete opposite. It was a free, openly connected, complex network of pathways. It looked like, if you were to look at a map of Dark Souls, it was multi-level, it was very connected, not linear at all. Dark Souls 2 is a mix. I mean, this is the other thing that really bugged me, was geographically, none of the locations make sense. Like, to get from Majula to Hyde's Tower of Flame, you have to go down a tunnel that connects to Majula, and pull a lever that opens a floodgate and get through the hall to the end. But you end up miles from Majula, somewhere out to the sea. That doesn't make any sense, because you've covered about 200 metres and you've gone about 3 miles. Sorry for screwing up metric and imperial, but say, I don't know, you've gone 400 feet, or 500 feet, and you end up 3 miles away. So it's just, it doesn't make any sense like that. And so geographically it doesn't make any sense. The plot is paper thin, and basically you get told by rip-off of Lady in Black, the green emerald person, Lantern Core, I don't know what you want to call them, but basically this woman who's in Majula can level you up, which by the way is another odd design choice. Like, in Dark Souls, you could level up at any bonfire, in Demon Souls you could level up at the Lady in Black. Now, Dark Souls 2 has gone back to Demon Souls, so they've backtracked on gameplay. Rather than, you know what, I would have been fine. I would have been fine if they just made you like level up at any bonfire and kept her in the game. Use her to upgrade your Estus flasks and use her to give you some pointers, more direct that they should have been, but they weren't. Because you have to collect these these four big souls to get through this gate, which goes to the next big area and actually takes you to Dragonlight Castle, and that's whatever. But I feel like the story was so unbelievably thin in terms of why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, what's the end game for your character. Now, the point of the opening cutscene was to try and explain the story. In Dark Souls, it was very, introduce all the players, like who was involved, how they influenced the world, why you were going after them, and that sort of thing. Like, as far as I could tell, Nito didn't do anything bad. He was just a guy who looked over the undead in the catacombs, and we slaughtered him, or we will slaughter him, I meant to say, rather, because we've not done it yet in the walkthrough. Spoilers for Nito in Dark Souls, which is a game that's been out for almost 3 years. But yeah, so like Nito didn't really do anything bad. It's just we needed his soul to get to Gwyn to whatever. You know Dark Souls. I mean, come on. If you're watching my walkthrough of it, surely you must know about it. Or like if you've not seen my walkthrough and you just watch my walkthrough, I don't know, it's the first Dark Souls one you came across. Yeah, the game ends with you fighting a boss called Gwyn and whatever. But for Dark Souls 2, I feel like, I mean, I'm only about 2/3 of the game. I'm just about to defeat the last big boss soul, I guess, to get to the next bit of the game. But all the bosses, well, not all. There's a couple of exceptions, but from what I can tell, all the bosses are one of two things. They're either rip-offs of Dark Souls 1, or they're a big guy with a big sword. That's about it, really. And like this is the thing I like about Dark Souls. Dark Souls have a lot of very interesting enemies, enemy variation, size, shape, magic, melee, stealth, poison, whatever you want. There were a whole load of different enemies. In Dark Souls, it's just another guy with a sword, or another guy with a big sword, or another guy with a huge sword, and it's just you get bored after a while. Actually, that right there, that's the biggest problem with Dark Souls 2. It's boring. It's really, really boring. Compared to Dark Souls 2 is a complete time waste. Now, whether or not you would agree with me is, your own opinion, but I mean, Hyde's Tower of Flame was interesting, and Forest of Fallen Giants was at first interesting, but then you just go through it a couple of times and you get to the boss, who is just another big guy with a sword. You just feel sort of bored. And like there's a okay, this is a spoiler, so if you've not played the game, maybe you should get out now because there's going to be a few spoilers from here on out. Okay, so there's a big boss in Dark Souls 2 that's a rat, like a giant rat, and I feel that he is supposed to be the equivalent of Sif from Dark Souls, but it's poorly done, because there's no reason to go after it. It's just a really aggressive big rat. And by the way, that rat is a pain in the ass to get past, because he just charges you and takes away your entire stamina if you block it, and it's a very, very short window of dodge capability against him. So be careful when you get to the big rat. And the other thing is, there's 4 toxin rats alongside him, so you have to deal with them, and if you don't deal with them quick enough, you get bum rushed by a bunch of rats. It's not fun. Anyway, moving on with my opinion of the mechanics. Gameplay is mostly fine. A few areas they could have touched up on, like I'm just trying to think. Well, for one, they could have made jumping easier. Now, in Dark Souls, I feel like the jumping mechanic is reasonable, but in Dark Souls 2, it seems like the jumping mechanic is a bit sort of hit and miss, because I do the same thing. Push the left stick forward, hold B to run, and then quickly tap it to jump. You can do it by clicking in the left stick, but that's just awkward for me, so I just stick with pressing B. But that's the problem with Dark Souls. They should have fixed the jumping mechanic. How now? Wouldn't it have been easier if you could have just tapped it and jumped? Like if you just tap B, you jump on the spot. If you tap B while moving a direction with the left stick, you move in that direction while jumping, rather than having to do a running jump. And maybe it makes more sense for you to do a running jump because you get more momentum that way, but for gameplay it doesn't add anything other than to be annoying and a hit and miss mechanic. Like, I would say I've nailed about 60% of my jumps, and the other 40% I just either die or take damage. So, that's unreasonable. And plus there are a lot of little things in the game to make it more about difficulty, less about a fair, fun fight that is challenging, because there's a very fine line between hard because of difficulty and hard because of fair challenge. Dark Souls, in my opinion, nailed the fair challenge part reasonably well, aside from the Capra Demon fight. Aside from the Capra Demon fight, Dark Souls nailed the balancing of a fair challenge. But, and maybe another boss that shall not be named, but it has bed in the name. Anyway, for Dark Souls 2, they just seem to be focusing on difficulty, not on challenge. And you can see this because Dark Souls is oriented for one-on-one combat. Because of the way the gameplay mechanics works, you know, you can backstab an enemy, you can parry an enemy, you can lock onto a single enemy and focus directly on that direction of what that one enemy. Dark Souls 2 has made this really a pain in the ass by basically adding groups of tough enemies together. Now, in Dark Souls 1, you never had that. If you had groups of enemies, they were easy to take down and reasonably easy to outwit or outflank or outmaneuver. Dark Souls 2, however, spits in the face of that clever design by having groups of really tough, really hard to take down enemies in close proximity so that you probably aggro them all at the same time. Good example of this is in a place called the Lost Bastille, where you have a door that once you open it, you are faced with 3 groups of enemies. 1 2 group and 2 3 groups. Now these total of 8 enemies will come at you in these different groups. Normally you probably attract the 3 to the left of the door, you bring them out, kill them, then the 2 down the stairs, bring them out, kill them, and then the last 3 round a different hallway. But my problem with those 8 swordsmen is that they take at least 3 hits from even an upgraded weapon, and they wield Zweihanders, or a great sword of similar description, because they, you know, two-hand their blades, and they just swing them wildly at you. So, I mean, it's like stepping into a blender if you go after that bit in the Lost Bastille. So for me, that is a complete cheap way to increase difficulty, and it just forces players to use cheap tactics. Like for me, I just use a lot of AoEs, you know, magic and all that. So, but for a melee character, it must be hell unless you've got a super long range, high poise damage weapon. If you don't, then screw you. Die over and over and over again. Which, the last point before I end the video is, they decide to remove a little chunk, about, I think it's, not exactly, but maybe close to this, about 5% per every 2 deaths. Which is another odd thing. I thought it was 5% per death, but I've noticed this. You can die twice and your health only goes down on the second death. Like, you crush the human effigy, you become human, you get your full health back, then you die, then the little bar hardly goes down, or if it does go down at all, and then the second time you die it goes down 5%, you die again, doesn't go down, you die a 4th time, it goes down again. So I don't know if it's just, I don't know, I've got a strange bug, or strange glitch, or if it does go down every 2 deaths, or if it goes down every 1 death, or if it's just random. I don't really know. Because I have noticed a couple of times it's gone down on the first death, but a couple of times it doesn't. So it's really strange. Don't know if anyone else has any comments about that, but I don't know. Maybe it's my personal experience, or I'm going mad. Final thing about Dark Souls is the going down every time you die. It's unfair. It's masochistic, it's unfair, it's not necessary, it doesn't strengthen gameplay, it makes the challenge of the game weaker, because all it ends up making you do is use turtle tactics and cheap tactics to get past the hordes of really tough enemies that you have to get through. And hordes of enemies are trivial for a magic user like myself, but for everyone else they're pretty horrible, as far as I can tell. And that is the biggest punch in the face to the mechanics of Dark Souls, in my opinion, is the fact that your health, basically, if you get killed once, then it becomes easier for you to become killed, and it's this vicious cycle that forces you to burn a finite resource, otherwise known as the human effigies. So overall, what do I think of Dark Souls 2? If I had to give it a stand-up rating out of 10 at the moment, it earns about a 6 at best, a 5 if you're easily antagonized by games, but it's nowhere near Dark Souls. Like, in my opinion, Dark Souls is a 8 or 9 out of 10 at least. Personally, I'd give it a 9. It's not perfect, but it's damn near close. So, that's my opinion of Dark Souls 2. In my opinion, it's not worth buying at the moment. If you liked Dark Souls, because it's not the same game. It's much more difficult, it's much more evil, it doesn't strengthen the game, and one quick last little thing is they have replaced the 5 Estus Flask mechanic and then kindling fires to get more Estus Flasks by simply adding healing items, and they're farmable. Going back with our games, aren't we, From Software? Because basically, in Dark Souls, you had 5 Estus Flasks, you could kindle up to 20 once you had the Sacred Rite and Humanity enough to kindle a bonfire, but it forced you to be conservative with your Estus Flasks, because that was your only healing item aside from Humanity, which were too finite to be able to burn them effectively and use them as a healing item. Whereas in Dark Souls 2, they can just farm life gems, Radiant Life Gems or Old Life Gems, to just have infinite healing items that may be finite, but they're farmable. If they weren't farmable, they'd probably be an okay mechanic, but they are. So what's the point? It just makes the game easier, surely. Or if it doesn't, because you've decreased Estus Flasks, it just makes the game more tedious. So what's the point? You may as well just stick with the 5 Estus Flask mechanic. So I've rambled on enough. I'll get back to my Dark Souls 2, or Dark Souls, that's going to be annoying, Dark Souls walkthrough soon, and in the next couple of days I'll be uploading more parts. So, I've been the Manty Guy, see you guys later, bye.